If he didn't say it, he'd probably explode. Curtis Wright is on the beat now.
We are back, 7:05, hour number 2. It's Monday morning, and he's in studio. Thomas Vass is with us. This is another installment of Cape Fear Capital Connections, talking about capital funding for businesses here, tech businesses, especially here in southeastern North Carolina in the Cape Fear region. Cape Fear Capital Connections. Good morning, sir.
Hey, it's good to be with you, Curtis, and I appreciate you being on your program with you.
Before we get started, and I know you've got a lot of slides today to go over, I want to hear a little bit. You were actually contacted by a news outlet out of California, and you did an hour-long interview about capital funding, and I'm curious as to what the topic was and what some of the details that were discussed.
Well, this is a great, huge global platform called CrowdFundBeat, and you know that I like to talk about crowdfunding. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I'd like to do in the Cape Fear is establish an infrastructure so that retired people or wealthy folks could find companies in the Cape Fear Valley and invest in them. So this great, huge website has a TV channel, just like Media Talk has a channel. And so they called me up. They had read about Private Capital News Network and the Cape Fear Capital Connection. They had read about it, and they called me up, and they wanted to talk to me about the linkage between crowdfunding and economic development and small business development. So that's an area that not very many people talk about, which is how do you use crowdfunding as a tool for economic growth, and that is one of the reasons why they wanted to talk to me.
I'm curious because things have dramatically flipped in a way. When I ended up in Los Angeles in end of the 70s, it was really that time period into the early 80s that you had, I think it was every month, 1,000 people moving into California and 100 companies. Now it's completely flipped.
It's totally
and
backwards.
I'm wondering if the interest level is growing for crowdfunding because money is so much money. They're talking about billions and billions, hundreds of billions that are leaving California, and I wonder if that's the situation.
I think part of that's true. I think that they are very concerned. Actually, the host that was interviewing me actually was more worried about their water situation than he was about the economic situation. I mean, that came through very clearly that they've got a terrible problem in California. But I do think that they are aware of the fact that there's got to be a lot better infrastructure. I talked a lot about regional stock markets, regional stock exchanges, and that's how we financed our national growth back in the 1880s, 1890s. We had regional stock markets. And for the people in the Cape Fear Valley, that's what I think we need to go to. I think we need to transition from the Cape Fear Regional Capital Exchange, which is a business networking event. We need to transition that and move towards having the Cape Fear Regional Stock Exchange, where we can trade our securities and take more control over our economic destiny.
I think one of the things, and we talked about this last week, and we've got a lot to cover today, but we talk about companies that are withholding their money. They're keeping they're building up a lot of cash and have been, and they're keeping it tight to the vest. And then you have a situation in California where years and years it was all based on venture capital as well. That was the second component. So I think if you've got the venture capitalists drying up and withholding, and if you have those companies, those large companies withholding, a major move by Disney just this week, divesting itself of 23 radio stations. Not that it wasn't making a profit, it wasn't making enough profit.
Right.
And they wanted more money to hold. So, I think what you're seeing is, there needs to be another alternative here developed around the country.
As we've talked before, there needs to be an integrated strategy where you tie capital market activities, and nothing happens until you make a capital investment. I mean, the free enterprise system simply doesn't work unless you have capital investments at the front end of the economic strategy. And then you've got to tie that capital infrastructure to what makes the most sense. And what makes the most sense economically is small business development, especially technology companies. And I've mentioned before, we've got 112 really good technology companies in Pender and New Hanover County, and there's 150 of them up there in Bladen and Cumberland County. We've got to take really good care of those companies, and our current economic strategy, which is what I want to talk about today, it doesn't address small companies' capital infrastructure at all. It's tied into this horrible, old, backwards strategy of giving away industrial recruitment incentives, and it's all done in secret, and we need to talk about that.
Well, you say here there's been a lack of leadership in the area of setting a vision of economic growth. This is from a 2013 report. This perception is validated by current policies in place, and we could go on. You're right. And we're seeing it right now with trying to close up and we're going to be talking with Representative Millis about trying to close up the General Assembly. The Republicans are fighting over the creation of a new $20 million slush fund. And that's what it is. It's a slush fund. It's another one of those funds that they believe that, and Decker, who is our Commerce Secretary and our governor, although they've said they didn't believe in it, are still banking on this old, bribes and kickback kind of idea to come to our, spur economic development.
It's totally backwards. And the fact of the matter is the people that promote this on our county commission here in New Hanover or on the Wilmington Business Development Board, they've got to justify. It is incumbent on them to defend why incomes in New Hanover County are going down. If this was an economic success, incomes would be going up, but our citizens are suffering with their incomes going down because this economic strategy of elite insiders giving away incentives does not work. Our incomes in New Hanover County are down 6% in 5 years. That's a dramatic drop. In North Carolina, our incomes are down in 10 years. Our incomes are down from $48,000 to $41,000. Our citizens are going backwards, and this is a direct result of the lack of leadership and the lack of economic strategy. There is no focus on capital. There is no focus on small business.
Well, I was talking earlier, this previous segment, about this continual idea in North Carolina. By the way, North Carolina is a $107 billion in debt. That's what we're carrying. Now, we're reducing that, and that's a good thing. I think that if you're a company looking at North Carolina, you can now say that our taxes are getting in line and they're dependable, they're reasonable, something that you can depend on. I think that if you look at, our debt situation, no more borrowing and slush funds. So we got to stick to that idea. But let's come to New Hanover County in the city of Wilmington. If I'm someone who has a business or I'm someone who wants to retire, they're on the internet and they can get the information and they can read the headlines. And if you read the headlines, it's constantly bond after bond after bond, or, using money for things that aren't the responsibility of government. Well, everybody, there are people that actually do have gray matter between their ears, and they go, wait a second, that's not where I want to be. Then we look at Brunswick County. No on the bond, no on the bond, no on the bond. Live within your means. Well, where are you going to move? If you decide you want to move somewhere, you're going to move somewhere where the taxes are reasonable, and you have a reasonable expectation of where they're going to be over a period of time. But you're not going to move to an area that every other day might be borrowing hundreds of millions of dollars.
The thing that we've talked a lot about, Curtis, is that there's got to be a coherent economic strategy. And our county commissioners and our city council, they just go from crisis to crisis. There is no long-term economic strategy, and that washes over into the political system, where you have a group of insiders who are doing things in secret that are beyond the reproach, beyond the accountability of the citizens. As this report by Kevin Maurer on the economic report, he says Wilmington Business Development's work generally stays behind the scenes. Well, what he's saying there very gently and nicely is that they do all of their work in secret, and they hand out the tax incentives in secret. Well, you have political insiders who benefit from industrial recruitment sitting on the board making decisions about what to hand out of the taxpayers' money. There is no strategy. If that strategy of insiderism had actually worked and we had a high rate of employment, we had high income, it might be okay, but it's not.
We'll be right back with Thomas Vass. We'll continue our discussion here on Cape Fear Capital Connections. Don't forget to follow this segment on Facebook, Cape Fear Capital Connections. And also you can link to his website, which is
It's Business Capital Advice and Private Capital News Network.
All those links are there under the About segment on the About page. I'm Curtis Wright on the beat. Lots more to talk about. We're back live here on the beach, 7:20 this Monday morning. Cape Fear Capital Connections with Thomas Vass. Remind you again to please follow us on Facebook, Cape Fear Capital Connections. You can link to all of his blogs and his websites and stay up on his writings about creating a capital marketing and even crowdfunding here in the Cape Fear region. We want to start back with this report, talking about, are we on the right track? Wilmington Business Development, it used to be called something else, and then they got so many people started dropping off their roles because they didn't believe that I forget what it was, Wilmington Industrial, WID, wasn't doing a good enough job. People a couple years ago started dropping off their roles, so they changed it to Wilmington Business Development. And I must say this in support of the county commissioners. It was a couple years ago that finally the county commissioners said, we're not just going to write you a check every year. You're only going to get so much money, and you're going to have to justify our money to you year after year. Now, some may still say it's a rubber stamp. They are being at least made in some way to be accountable. What I don't understand is why a group of Republicans on the county side who call themselves conservatives support an entire system that they say in the GOP platform is not the system for proper economic development. In other words, putting it in the hands of government with taxpayer money instead of leaving it in the private sector.
It's a great, huge system that's been in place. It was put in place actually at the turn of the 20th century, around 1898. It's got this historical continuity to it, industrial recruitment, using government as a linchpin to hand out tax dollars. And the Republicans are helpless. They're totally helpless to change the direction and the history of North Carolina, and they're not doing it. They should do it. I mean, there's some leaders in the Republican Party that talk about changing, but most of the Republicans here in the county and also up there in Raleigh with the state Republican Party, they don't have any incentive because they're all part of the insider system. It just doesn't.
Well, everybody in this town who's lived here for a period of time knows that if you go down the rolls of the active WBD officers, executives, or people, you will see that they have a direct link to the local politicians as far as raising money for their campaigns. Well, come on, we all know this. This isn't anything controversial.
And here's it's kind of like a cash wash system, washing your cash. It's a closed circle. They raise the money from the same folks that benefit from the use of industrial recruitment. So they give money to elect the leaders, the people that represent us. Those leaders turn around and hand out tax dollars for industrial recruitment, and that benefits the political donors. So it's a closed system.
Well, look at Titan Cement. This community was kept in the dark. In fact, it was just blatantly lying to us for a period of time. They finally got caught with their pants down. Then we found out what was going on with Titan. Then we find out, deals that were made. And by the way, putting the health and well-being of our community at risk as well. Don't you think we should have been involved? And then when one of the leaders of WID, at that time called WID, gets his panties all in a bunch, he goes out and forms a political action group to fight against the very citizens whose money is going to be used for a project they don't want.
It's totally bad. I want to go back to this Kevin Maurer report. Kevin Maurer is a reporter here in town, a decent fellow. I've read some of his work. And he's got a quote in his report about On the Right Track. Quote, WBD doesn't really have a strategy, of course, but I'm more concerned that we, county government, city government, the business community, we don't have a clearly articulated strategy, said a former WBD members. We don't have a strategy, and that is part of the problem. If you don't have a strategy, then anything works. If you don't have a plan, anything works, and we move from crisis to crisis, and the people that benefit from that are the political insiders.
Well, wait a second, Thomas. How about if I take Fred's money? Mark, Mark just wrote me a check. Mark, thank you. I'm going to take Mark's money. Oh, by the way, Mark didn't know that he wrote me a check because I just took it from him. And I'm going to give it to you, Thomas, to come to my community. Are you going to come?
Oh,
free money?
Yeah, I'm going to come.
Hey, there you go. There's their strategy. That's what it is. I take from Mark without his approval, and then I offer it to you without. But by the way, without Mark's knowledge.
But you've got to close the loop, and then once you get to Wilmington, once you get to New Hanover County, since you've been recruited here with incentives, you turn around and you support politically the people that gave you the money. So it's a closed loop. I want to go to a quote in Mauer's report from Woody White, the chairman of the New Hanover Board of Commissioners. He says in this report, quote, WBD is a critical part of this. Our success will be dependent upon the success of WBD, end quote. Well, we've got the statistics that WBD's strategy is not a success. So you've got to ask the commissioner, Mr. White, how do you justify the 10 years where this has been a total failure? How do the citizens hold?
Well, they go back to the GE days, and they think, oh, GE. Then they give all these kickbacks to Corning. Oh, it's Corning. And then it was, some of these other things that, by the way, you're right, that when you go in the last 10 or 15 years and you actually look at anything beyond that, it's been a wash. I mean, a negative.
Well, they're very, very defensive. The WBD is. There's another quote here, actually from the WBD was so concerned about the report that Mauer did that they wrote a very defensive letter back to the little Wilmington Business Journal. And they said, quote, our organization's efforts do not warrant the dismissive treatment and condescending tone represented in your pages last week. The people and businesses of Greater Wilmington deserve better, and so does WBD. Well, there's a part of that occurs.
But see, that's their arrogance, Tom.
There's a part
they have had this arrogance that we have no right to have a comment or an involvement using our money.
But there's a part of that I like, and that is, and the citizens deserve better. Well, yes,
we do.
Yes,
better.
WBD, we do deserve better. We deserve a lot better out of you, and it's real hard to hold a nonprofit political organization accountable for the use of the monies that has resulted in failure. So the citizens do deserve better, and what we've got to have is we've got to have a performance audit of the WBD. All the tax dollars, 35% of their operational revenues come from tax dollars, and they are the linchpin in handing out the industrial recruitment incentives that are all done in secret. So yes,
and it's more than that. It's incestuous, because what we've done on the Chamber of Commerce side is we let someone who's the head of the largest government organization, our hospital, our public hospital, be the head of the chamber. Wait a second. No. That's not how it's supposed to be. Or they go over and they talk to the chancellor at UNCW. I mean, who gave them the right to use our public institutions and use the credibility of those in the offices without our approval?
Right.
If they and by the way, I think it's a tremendous conflict of interest to allow the head of a public institution to be part of a private board like the chamber.
Well, exactly right. Dixon McLean, who signed the defensive letter to the Wilmington Business Journal, is a CPA at McGuire Woods, and Mr. McLean knows what a performance audit is. Mr. McLean knows what a forensic audit is, and Mr. McLean knows what a conflict of interest audit is. His company is the linchpin that negotiates the industrial recruitment incentives. He's the chairman of WBD. His company directly benefits from these industrial recruitment incentive negotiations. He's aware of all these audits that I've just mentioned because he's a CPA. And so I would say to Mr. McLean, look, if you're so defensive about what's going on and you have nothing to hide, then let's go ahead and have an audit. Let's have a performance audit over the last 10 years and see how much money we've spent as citizens and see what we've gotten out of that. Let's examine whether there's any kinds of forensic problems, which means fraud, in the use of those dollars? And is there any kind of conflict of interest that we need, as citizens, need to investigate? Well, he's a CPA. He understands.
Well, I think we've all known in this community for 20 years that there's been a conflict of interest. I think positively, a couple years ago when the community rose up and they finally made them justify themselves each year, finally put us a little bit on the right track. But there's a long way to go. We're out of time, folks, and we'll continue this discussion with Thomas Vass. Don't forget, on Facebook, all of these notes, all of these slides are up there each week. Make sure you go there. We'll be right back. I'm Curtis Wright on The Beat.